quite interesting, that verse, our young men shall see visions, and our old men shall dream dreams. And I've always thought, well, I'm not an old man, I'm not going to dream dreams. But in fact, there must be another meaning to it, because a dream, oh, terrible. Wild dream, yeah, but it being the basis of the message today. So it must come from God or somewhere. But I think it comes from God. But yeah, I think I played the part of a prostitute at one point in the dream. Yes, but I won't go into those details. But certainly got it clear in my head, and my heart, what God wants to say. God made all of us out of love. I don't know if you've ever thought through it at all. But I mean, why should he do anything? Because he obviously was self-sufficient, and that's part of the meaning even of what we can understand by the Trinity, that God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit were together. And we're self-sufficient. And do you remember right at the beginning it says, let us make man in our image. God turning round to his Son, the Holy Spirit. So God himself was self-sufficient. And why did he make us? And he made us out of love. And he didn't make us because he needed us. And that isn't the basis of love. And Bart is very interesting in his deep philosophical wanderings or thinkings that I follow as best I can. He made the point that it was a massive, he doesn't put it in these silly terms, but it was a massive decision by God to project himself outside himself, to make it possible for anyone to know him. I know you lose your mind as you begin to think about that. But without going into the philosophical implications of that one, obviously God at some time determined to make us. And he didn't make us because he needed us. He made us out of love. And that's what love is. And that's the important thing to hold on to as we go on talking. Love is God. God is love. Love is self-giving. God made us because he wanted to give himself. And that's why he made everything around us out of love, out of a desire to give himself. And in order to preserve the race long enough to give us all a chance to see the possibility of God or not God, and it seems to me that's the purpose of our lives, so that we would have a choice, so that we would not be prisoners, we would not be robots, we would be made by God in his Son, but we would have the opportunity to say no or yes. And so God, in order to preserve the race long enough centuries, enough years, for us, for numbers of us, to make that choice, God built into the race one of his own characteristics. And one of his own characteristics was to create, to make us. It was out of love that he made us. And he knew that that had to continue, irrespective of what our attitude was, in order to give us that chance. He had to preserve the race. He had to find some way to preserve the race so that we would all have the opportunity to make the choice of whether him or not him. And so he built into the race procreation. And he enabled us to procreate. He enabled a man and a woman to have intercourse and to produce children. But that was a small part of what he himself did. The creation, in a way, was the smallest part. The biggest part was the love that produced the creation. But into that creation was something of his general grace. He gave that to all men, whatever they were like. Everybody could procreate. It was part of God's common grace. It wasn't part of his redeeming grace. It was part of his common grace. It was like the rain that rains on the righteous and the unrighteous. It was something that God gave to everybody. Man grabbed that. Because God made it, for one thing, pleasant to procreate, and for another, it, strangely enough, expressed some of his original desire to create. And so to some extent, it had something of God in it, but just a little. It was his love that gave it meaning and gave it fullness and gave it truth and actually gave it the enjoyment too. Everything came from the fact that he created because of love. And so even procreation, which he built into people, whether they wanted it or not, he built that into them. That had something of that sense about it. Man took that because it was nice, it was pleasant, it was enjoyable. And if you were a farmer, it got you workers for the field. And if you wanted eternity, and you felt you hadn't it, it gave you some sense of eternity and living in the children you procreated. So man elevated that. And that became love. In our human minds, that became love. So if anybody wants to know what love is nowadays, I forget the guy in The Perfect Storm, but you go to see him, or you go to see
Clooney,
or you go to see the other fellow.
Tom
I
Cruise.
don't give a damn. Frankly, I don't give a damn.
Clark Gable.
Clark Gable. But that has become love. And family. Family has become. And if you want a real experience of love, you had better get what. I remember one, I won't talk about the young lady that said it, but she had to get her hunk. You know. And if you want to experience love, you better get your girl. And you better get married, because that's where love is experienced. And of course, it doesn't take a genius to see that half the marriages end up now in divorce, and this is love. The latest couple, I think, added a little comment at the end of their divorce, yeah, we're sorry about the children. And that is love. Yes, that's love today. It may hurt the children, it may condemn them to a life of defeat and loneliness, it may hurt your partner, it may hurt you yourself, it may commit both of you to a life of half promises and a sense of defeat and a sense of a lack of satisfaction. But that's love. But of course, it is not love at all. And it never was love. It was always primarily a way to procreate the race. And it was just one aspect of God. And in a way, a secondary aspect of the central mark of his character, which is love. But all of us have come up in that society. And it is just deeply burned into our minds and hearts. Love is what my dad gave me. Love is what my mom gave me. Love is what I have for my dad and my mom. Love is what I have for my brothers and sisters. No love will ever be as great as that. And that is the dreadful reality that governs so many lives in our world. And we are part of that world. We are part of that society. And totally is forgotten the idea that love is self-giving. Completely. We've forgotten that love is giving. Love isn't getting. But in marriage, what am I getting out of this? Indeed, now we have to have prenuptial agreements as to how we'll divide up the combined resources that we have. So convinced are we that love is getting. And why the bed problems? Always the same. Always for the same reason. I don't want to offend, really, but now I've read Grey's Anatomy, even the fellow who had his penis cut off by his girlfriend, it's the heart of what love has become. Getting satisfaction, getting pleasure, getting what you want from the other person. And I think the heart of the message this morning is we have regarded that as love. We have regarded procreation and family as love. And yet repeatedly we have seen it again and again, that often self-giving is just a little part that God at times gets through in an odd mum and dad at certain times. But even in family, there's an awful lot of giving and getting. An awful lot of scratching your back if you scratch mine. An awful lot of what the dear old Chinese are brought up in, that you need children to look after you when you grow old. And you give them something and they give you something. And so a great deal of family life and home life has stood for this perversion of love that has a lot of getting in it and a little bit of giving. And what I can see God has given us is the opportunity to live the way He planned. That is, in a community of heaven that is based on real love, on self-giving, on giving ourselves. And of course, we just see it very plainly together. Even we saw it, glimpsed it in the conversation that we had last night. We see that the only reason really we were brought together was so that we would get ready for heaven, so that we would come to live and to love the way we will live and love in heaven. And that's why the Father has drawn us into a family that isn't based on self-love and on self-satisfaction, but is based on self-giving. And I think that's one of the things that God is beginning to teach us. I was saying to Peggy yesterday, I think it was, maybe today, but I think yesterday. I was saying it was a bit of a shock to me when I might not have used exactly this illustration, but this was the heart of what I said. It was a bit of a shock to me when Don McCabe burned the electronics store down by leaving the candle lit. Remember, I was sitting here and he was sitting where Marty is, and the lawyer was sitting beside him, and I think the lawyer said to him, "Do you remember leaving the candle lit?" And Don said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Why did you leave it lit then?" Why did you leave it lit? So I was trying in some way to cut down the tremendous penalty, that we would have to bear if they could prove that he deliberately left the candle burning in order to burn the place down. And it was then that I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I have incurred responsibility for not just my wife. That I knew. If she got into difficulties or trouble, I would be responsible for it with her. But I have incurred responsibility for this fellow and what he does. And then I remembered Dennis Hackett, who didn't know how to fix the brakes on a car and was in charge of the service station that we ran. And I thought, wait a minute. And then I thought of Jane Wallace, who I persuaded to go across to the grocery store and buy 2 loaves of bread instead of just one. That way we'd get it a little cheaper. And I thought, I'm going to incur responsibility for this whole crew. And I felt that because I felt we're family. I felt that's what we're family. But it was a definite step that I took back in those years, and that was part of the whatever burden there is. Jesus bears the burdens, but whatever burden one had to bear, that was part of it. As the thing grew and grew, you realized you were responsible for everything that everybody else did, and you would be the one that finally paid the piper. I think it's very easy to try to avoid that. It's very easy to try to avoid that and to, in a sense, take the benefits of family life but without its responsibilities. And I think it's very easy to say, the girl created the garden. That's her baby. Or this person thought of this. That's their baby. I'm not responsible. And of course, a marriage doesn't last past a day of that. That's it. A marriage only lasts as long as each person feels a real sense that the other loves them as they used to love themselves. That they really do love their neighbor as themselves. And while that continues, the community continues and the family life continues and the marriage continues. When that ceases, there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect. You may continue to be part of the operation or part of the family, but there's a little bit of a disconnect. You still feel, well, yeah, I'm on the outside, I'm not burned by everything that happens here, and I'm certainly not responsible for it all. And in the case of the garden, obviously it's dead easy, you know. Well, okay, the weeds are up there, but I didn't think of the garden. It wasn't my idea. I didn't decide to spend all this money on it. Why should? Why should you? Because we're part of each other. Because we're together. Because we're part of Jesus together. And what you do is what I do. And of course there's a vast difference once you enter into that. Once you enter into that concept, you cease to be an outsider in the operation. You cease to be kind of part of it, you know, a visitor, a guest, and you become part of it itself. And that's what love is. Love is giving ourselves to God and to each other with no reservations. And we joke a lot about what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine, and what's mine is my own. You know, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is my own. Big difference between that and saying what's yours is mine and what's mine is yours. We're together in the thing. And I can see that the Father wants us to enter into that in all its fullness. And I think it does require a real understanding of what God is about here, and a real understanding of what true love is. And then it does take a constant willing, because there's plenty of opportunity, you know, plenty of opportunity for saying, oh, I have something to do, or I will not be home, or I will not, or 1,000 other reasons. So we have all kinds of ways of getting around that. Or I don't want to, you know, I don't want to be roped into some project here. Maybe if I stay out of the way, I won't be roped in, you know, or maybe if I do not appear to be available or have other things to do, then I won't be. There's a whole attitude there of love or of self-love that fulfills God's will for us or frustrates His will for us. And I can see that that's part of what we're learning. Learning it in a community that has little time for such commitment. Learning it in a society that has long ago given up that whole idea of love. But it's what God has called us to. And it takes constant, daily commitment, and certainly a metanoia in the Greek word, you know, a change of mind, a change in the way we think. But I do believe that it's what love is about. Now, what I could see very plainly last night or in the early hours of the morning is, if you don't enter into this, you become a half person. You become a half person. No, you don't have the burden of children, thank goodness. And you don't have the burden of taking them around to the Little League clubs. And you don't have the burden of loneliness when the husband dies or the wife dies. You live alone in your own little hell. so you can protect yourself from the responsibilities of family. But it's at a dreadful cost. Dreadful loneliness. I remember it actually, and I think it maybe did get through to her. But I remember the lady who eventually, I remember, married C.S. Lewis, saying at one time in the movie anyway, you know, you are untouched by everything. You are untouched by everything. And he realized that. He realized that he had lived a very academic life for too long, with nothing really, just his brother, you remember, who was an old English military bachelor too, and he had lived all along at that kind of intellectual distance from his students and from his colleagues in the faculty. And I do believe that was certainly one real change that came to him in those last years. But I think that's, in a very real sense, the choice that we are all facing now. And one of the reasons perhaps God gave me the dream last night was, if it's time to sort it out now, because when everybody joins us, it'll be one great party. It'll be one great party, and we may not see things as clearly as we can see them now. And so it would be good, and maybe they will see this movie too, and all this video, and will hear something from God themselves. But think through it a little. Is this really true? I think it is true that the whole idea of marriage has been utterly perverted, and the whole idea of love is tied to it. And our idea of love is tied to that too, and we certainly really believe that if we don't have our hunk, or we don't have our girl, or we don't marry our Prince Charming, we will never fully experience love, and we've committed ourselves, okay, we're going to have a loveless life, and by Jove, everybody else has suffered because of that. Because you live a kind of austere life, in a sense, an austere, cold life that is more like the life of the monastic, you know, than it is of a living part of a living, dynamic organism called Jesus Christ. So think about it and pray about it, and especially in our life together. I'm sure every dad is like my dad. Come home from the work and it's hard and they're worn out, you know, but what would you like, dear? Is there anything you'd like me to do? I'm sure that's it. And I just say there, right there. Is that how you come through the door on a Friday night? What can I do? Or is it, let me get up to my room before somebody gets me? Seems to me we need to see very clearly, love is self-giving. It's not self-giving. So not bad for an unprepared sermon, but from Jesus.